The honourable member for Calgary Rocky Ridge has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, it really gives me pleasure to have the opportunity to have a concurrence debate on this important report that was tabled in the House of Commons. The Standing Committee on National Defence undertook a lengthy and comprehensive study of Arctic security, and Arctic security is Canadian national security, it's continental security, it is under significant threat, and we are in a rapidly evolving threat environment that current policy and the current policy of this government is just not ready to face. And so there were 26, I think, 26 recommendations. And these recommendations are extremely important, and I think it's important that we have an opportunity to get the government members on the record, whether they support this or not, and vote on these important recommendations. We had a very cooperative committee. We heard from a variety of witnesses, about 46 witnesses, if I recall, that all parties were able to bring to committee and hear a variety of perspectives on Arctic security and how best to undertake a policy of an improvement or a policy of Arctic security. The New Democratic Party dissented from the other parties and had a supplemental report, and so I think that it's probably I imagine that they would look forward to having an opportunity to get on the record whether they utterly reject this committee report, given their dissension on some of the points that they identified in their report. So these reports are important. They inform the government. And it's important that members of Parliament have the opportunity to both debate them and to have their views recorded for their constituents. So the recommendations here are, if they're all adopted, would be transformative in our Arctic security. And so I bring to members' attention a number of them. The first recommendation, the Government of Canada immediately begin the process to procure undersea surveillance capabilities for Arctic waters in order to detect and monitor the presence of foreign threats to our national security. So we heard expert testimony from the Canadian military, or from the Canadian Armed Forces. We heard academic experts from Canada as well as from other allied countries, and it was really quite sobering, Mr. Speaker, to hear and learn from experts the shortcomings and gaps in domain awareness. And in the Arctic region is an enormous landmass, and it actually represents 3/4 of Canada's coastline. And so domain awareness is extremely important for the security of Canada, for continental security, and for our sovereignty as well, Mr. Speaker. So the ability to detect and monitor the presence of foreign threats in this environment is challenging. The present present infrastructure that we have is not up to it, and there are many areas of domain awareness that need immediate attention, and there are some more specific recommendations that I'm going to get to. But we need to, so the committee is recommending that the Government of Canada immediately begin its process to procure undersea surveillance capabilities, which takes us to the second recommendation, which is a little bit more specific, that the Government of Canada undertake on an urgent basis a procurement process to replace the Victoria-class submarines with new submarines that are under ice capable for operations in our Arctic waters. So at present, Canada has a fleet of 4 submarines, and there is a long and sorry and tragic, Mr. Speaker, history of this submarine procurement that occurred a generation ago. Of these 4 submarines, at most we can have 1 in the water at a time. In 2019, I believe, we went a whole year without a submarine sailing in our Canadian waters. So this is unacceptable in the current threat, the environment with which we find ourselves, and given the sheer volume of our Arctic space and our Arctic coastline. But even when these particular submarines are in the water, Mr. Speaker, they cannot operate under ice for the length of time required to ensure under subsurface domain awareness. These submarines cannot traverse the Northwest Passage. They cannot go from Atlantic to Pacific or Atlantic to Pacific coast. So we desperately need superior capability for subsurface domain awareness, and so the committee has recommended that this procurement be undertaken urgently. We talk about, in fact, there's another recommendation. I'm not going to have time to go through them all, but one of the other recommendations is also quite specific and gets into, subsurface detection and the ability, not necessarily vessel-borne, but to have the sonic capability to detect submarines in our waters. In fact, we had expert testimony that said that we presently there is not the ability to have full domain awareness, either surface awareness or subsurface awareness. So this needs to be done urgently. And part of the emerging threat environment that was brought forward and expressed quite forcefully from or by the Chief of Defense Staff, General Eyre, who said, look, we are, in his words, if I can find it quickly, he said that we are in the most dangerous period. He said that the threat environment is greater than at any time, even during the Cold War. He said perhaps there has been no greater threat environment facing Canada since the beginning of the Second World War. So this is testimony from the Chief of Defense Staff, Mr. Speaker. That's the urgency of preparedness, or the crisis of preparedness that we face now. Greater than the heights of the Cold War, Mr. Speaker, according to our own Chief of Defense Staff. And this was echoed by other experts at our committee. So one of the third recommendation in this report is that the Government of Canada reconsider its long-standing policy with respect to the U.S. ballistic missile defense program. And this one was one that I do note that there was division on the committee. You will see in the supplemental report from the New Democratic Party that they did not agree with this recommendation. So again, the part of why it's important that we have concurrence debates and concurrence votes is so that members can go on the record and declare whether or not they support these important recommendations that have been made to the government. But in the report, we heard from witnesses. They raised concerns about Canada's lack of a missile defense system, suggesting that our country is currently vulnerable because we have virtually no capability to intercept inbound missiles of any type. And so experts had referred to Canada's lack of participation in the ballistic missile defense and the Government of Canada's February 2005 announcement and decision that Canada would not join the United States in its ballistic missile program. So this happened many years ago. This was, so the threat environment is different today. We see what is happening throughout the world. We see the threat that Russia poses to its neighboring countries and its global ambition. Russia it's clear to Russia that it considers Canada that is one of its targets, Mr. Speaker. We see it in a number of ways, And we need to be prepared for that, for the threat that Russia poses to our security and our sovereignty in the Arctic. And we need look no further than the illegal and just utterly shocking invasion of Ukraine to see the kind of threat that Russia poses to its peaceful neighbors. And Canada is a peaceful neighbor in the Arctic region, but we need to adapt to the threat environment with which we find ourselves. And the recommendation of this committee on revisiting that decision from 2005 is an important one that I think members of this House should have the opportunity to both debate and to vote on. So that was the third recommendation. The fourth recommendation was that the Government of Canada urgently address the personnel crisis in the armed forces by fast-tracking the recruitment of new members, aiming to complete the recruitment process in under 6 months and ensure we have the level of personnel needed to defend our Arctic now and into the future. This is perhaps the greatest crisis of the Canadian Armed Forces is personnel. There is a personnel crisis. There are 16,000 vacant positions that need to be filled to get us up to the current strength that our own current planning is based on. But it's even worse than that, Mr. Speaker, because we've also heard testimony in subsequent studies that, or heard reports of this as well, that there are 10,000 undertrained, undeployable members within the CAF. So we need 16,000 new recruits. We need to get 10,000 existing recruits up to deployable readiness. And that is without undertaking a series of these other recommendations that would involve new kit, new capability, or new tasks that our forces can undertake. So, Mr. Speaker, we've got to do something about this. This is, and it affects every part of the Canadian Armed Forces. I asked one of the generals if he could, identify, which position is most urgently need to, which one needs to be filled the most, and we've been told that it's everything. It's everything from cooks to pilots. It's everything from electricians to tank crew members. So there are tremendous opportunities in the Canadian Forces, but we need the forces itself to ensure that its processes can be tightened and that we can bring people in more quickly. There's frustration expressed by some wishing to join the forces that it takes too long to get through the process and into the door. So I know I'm going to run out of time before I get through a lot of this stuff, but I do hope that we can debate many of these recommendations. But the fifth recommendation is the Government of Canada undertake a comprehensive survey of our infrastructure, military and civilian corporate holdings, as well as natural resources, mining, mineral operations in the Arctic for the purpose of forward planning for NATO modernization, and develop a strategy for critical infrastructure investments and protecting Canadian interests from malign foreign actors. So, Mr. Speaker, there's a lot in that recommendation. Our own awareness of what is in the Arctic, what private resources, what natural resources, and even what government resources all exist, are not properly inventoried in a way to best come up with an efficient and effective strategy for NORAD modernization. We had quite strange testimony. I thought it was just incredible to learn that in Inuvik, that a privately owned hangar that's adjacent to the runway in Inuvik is, if I understand correctly, I'd like to have the opportunity to travel there and just even see what's on the ground. But we had testimony that this is in fact the only building. It's not only the only hangar that a CF-18 or perhaps a future F-35 could be hangared. It's also the only building where refueling aircraft could be hangared. And the government let its lease with this private facility lapse, or it did not renew its contract with the operator. Well, the operator has a business to operate. He owns the building. Its purpose is to hangar large aircraft in a remote community. Do you know who was interested, Mr. Speaker, in taking over this building? The inquiries that he had as a business that had to make a decision whether to sell the building or find a new tenant. The United States government and the People's Republic of China's Ottawa personnel came kicking tires, looking around at this military facility in Inuvik. Quite staggering. The testimony was from this vendor was very interesting, and it reveals just how thin resources on the ground are in these remote communities and these remote places. You can't just park a CF-18 overnight when it's minus 45 and just go out and start it in the morning. This isn't, take out your driver's license and scrape off the windshield and get in and go. These aircraft need to be hangared, and the personnel have to have a warm place to go inside during things like a refueling process or any kind of maintenance. It's cold, it's bitter, it's life-threateningly cold in this environment, and the equipment needs to be stored properly, and the people that work there need to be able to stay warm. So it's things like this, figuring out what private assets exist that could be utilized in partnership with the Canadian Armed Forces or with the Canadian government. So NORAD, the urgency of NORAD modernization is something that is it's in the recommendations. The recommendation I just went through, and it's also in subsequent recommendations. I know I'm running out of time, but we lack. There is currently, for example, the present satellite system, the RadarSat mission is scheduled or believed to be at the end of life before we currently have any replacement for it. So we are looking at a gap, perhaps of years, without proper satellite radar satellite capability in the Arctic if we don't act immediately. So this is an urgent recommendation. It goes to the broader NORAD modernization, where we absolutely must get our NORAD systems in partnership with the United States. And this is tricky because their expenditure is high as well as ours. But this government has placed NORAD modernization, parts of it, in its budget, but we haven't seen any concrete steps to ensure that we won't have these critical failures of our Arctic domain awareness. We lack and desperately need over-the-horizon radar. We need much to ensure our Arctic safety. It's all in this report, Mr. Speaker, and so this report is of critical importance for Canada's future Arctic security. I urge members of Parliament who haven't read it to read it and to bring their voice to the debate on it and to register their support for it. If I've got any time at all, Mr. Speaker, all right, well, good. Then we can keep on with on the NORAD modernization and the financing of these large procurements. the government is lapsing much of its spending, so we're concerned that sometimes they even put things in the budget. They'll authorize it through Treasury Board and then not even get the money out the door. So now I am out of time and look forward to the questions that members will have about this important report.